And it's been a little less than 3 years now that Libya at the time, if we think back, was hailed as a successful example of multilateral engagement. We had seen NATO and our allies all working together to stop the slaughter of civilians and free and oppressed people from dictatorship, as was articulated at the time, to chart a prosperous path forward for this country in North Africa. Unfortunately, in the ensuing years, we have a situation since that date when the reality is that Libya has become chaotic, violent, awash in terrorist organizations, more militias than we can count. Its porous borders allow for the easy transit of people, of weapons, of money from conflicts across North Africa to Gaza to Syria to Iraq. And you have rival governments now in Tobruk and in Tripoli making competing claims of legitimacy. 4 months of fighting by the militias there, the last 4 months, has seen an additional 250,000 people flee Libya and brought a climate of fear, those are the words of the UN special report, a climate of fear across the country. Given this downward spiral, it was not surprising that our embassy in Tripoli had to be evacuated early this summer. And last week, some of us saw the online videos of militants occupying that building. I think it reminded Americans of the deadly terrorist attack on our facility in Benghazi that took place 2 years ago when you see that occupation. But you also saw these individuals doing belly flops into the pool. It was a reminder that, you know, you cannot neglect, you can't have a policy of neglect that then plays itself out into a humanitarian crisis and what, frankly, is a national security crisis. So a new UN Security Council has called for a ceasefire and sanctions on those involved in the violence. But at the end of the day, the rhetoric has not been matched up with leadership here. And perhaps we should not be surprised that regional states conducted airstrikes on Libya last month. Regional states are now attempting to affect their interests. They're hoping to help their favored proxy in this conflict. Some suggest that Libya may even be headed for a partition, or that neighboring Algeria or Egypt may intervene. We cannot allow Libya to become the Lebanon of the 1970s and 1980s. We remember what happened in Lebanon. We remember how long a society struggles with the aftermath of that situation. And what happened in Lebanon was that regional states played out their feuds at the expense of the local population. And if that's to be avoided, then Libya needs immediate attention. As we will hear today, the administration is pushing all sides toward a political solution. But I don't see this happening without real pressure on the factions, real leverage on those factions. Others advocate for cutting off outside support for militias and compelling their disarmament through threat of force. Such action would have to be coupled with programs to unlock Libya's wealth in order to train a security force for all Libyans. But given how poorly the U.S. and coalition partners have worked on Libya to date, it's tough to see such an effort coming together. We have not really had a desire to lead in Libya, and it's absolute necessity, I think, right now, that the administration lay out a strategy to lead in Libya. We need to hear testimony today on the administration's plan to respond to the very real threats to national security that a failed Libya represents. And we need to also hear about the different proposals for action in Libya that are being discussed at the United Nations. And there are proposals being discussed at NATO, and there's proposals being discussed among other North African countries. We need to hear what those options are, what those discussions are. Libya and every conflict is, of course, rooted in local conditions, but the many Middle Eastern conflicts do share a driving force of extremism, jihadists, fueled by radical ideology, armed and funded from outside the immediate area. In this case, again, not surprisingly, Qatar is up to its elbows in funding terrorist activity there or funding some of these militias, but other countries as well have their proxies. It is a deadly accelerant that the administration has been slow in recognizing and countering, and part of this hearing today is to bring some focus on it and bring some strategy into it. So I would now like to turn to our ranking member, Mr. Ted Deutsch of Florida.